it's not what you make, it's what you make possible. So don't think in terms of if you're a credit union, you're not making loans. What you're making possible is you're making it possible for your 16-year-old kid to drive a car, or your customer or your member's 16-year-old to drive a car. That's what you're making possible. You're making possible an opportunity for your client or your member or your customer to buy a home. So because a lot of times people in the financial services, they think of what they do versus what they make possible.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
I would never read so much text. This is long and boring to me. I've heard versions of this throughout my career from designers, and not to pick on designers, but I really don't care because they weren't the ideal customer for the product. So of course they weren't interested in the copy. Like my old boss, Mike Morgan, used to tell me, you never read the refrigerator ad on page 3 of the newspaper until your fridge breaks, because then you care. So when I read this lesson in a podcast guest application, it grabbed my attention. You don't have to like it. You aren't the target. To hear the story behind that lesson and many more lesson-filled stories, I invited on Renee Miller, the founder and executive creative director at the Miller Group. Thanks for joining me, Renee.
Thanks, Daniel. Good to be here.
All right, so let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to. Renee started her career in newspapers with internships at the Plain Dealer and Cincinnati Enquirer before being hired as a full-time journalist at the Arizona Republic. She moved into our industry when she got her job as an associate director of marketing at Torrance Memorial Medical Center, and she founded the Miller Group 34 years ago. That is some staying power in an industry that doesn't always have it, right? Renee manages a 12-person team at the Creative Boutique with another 15 for special projects. So Renee, give me a sense. What is your day like as the founder in the ECD?
Daniel, there's no one cookie cutter day. Everything is different all the time. We work remotely. We've been doing that even before COVID. There's a core group of us in Los Angeles. We have people in as far away as Israel. Our programmer works in Israel, Texas, Asheville, Chicago, New York. So we meet all once a week on Zoom, if not more. And every day is different. And I work on the weekends. So that's, and I do it. I spend a lot of time looking at fabulous creative work from other people because I know it motivates me. It motivates my team. Looking at what the innovators are doing, marketing innovators, and then motivating my team to be excellent. That's my job.
Perfect. Well, we have a lot of marketing innovators here in How I Made It in Marketing, and you are our latest. So let's take a look at some of the lessons from some of the things that you have made in marketing. As I said before, I've never really done any other career, but I don't feel like other people like it. They don't get to make things like we do, right? If you're an actuary or a podiatrist or whatever, you're not making things. But you actually start outside of marketing. You started in the newspaper industry, like I mentioned. And I always love bringing up those newspaper backgrounds. That's why I even brought up your internships. Because I think newspapers, I dabbled a very little very early in my career. It's just such good prep for marketing because you learn how to tell good stories. You learn how to find them and tell them. But you said, to mine own self be true. And it sounded like that newspaper career didn't go so well when you started. So you want to tell us about starting out as a rookie police reporter for the Arizona Republic?
Okay, so I was groomed through my J School, journalism school career at The Ohio State University to be an arts and entertainment and lifestyle reporter. And I had internships at the Cincinnati Enquirer, at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, all in that area. And when I graduated, I started applying for jobs. I was offered a job at a newspaper in New York, at a small Dow Jones paper, where I would have been the arts editor, traveling in Middletown, New York, traveling into the city every week to do film reviews. And I turned it down to go to the Arizona Republic as what I thought would be a general interest reporter. And I got a phone call. It was sight unseen. The guy said, "We're bringing on 6 rookies. If you're interested in the job, come out at your own expense, and you start in 2 weeks." And he was kind of a cowboy, somebody you'd call sort of a shit kicker. Very strange interview. And I don't know, I was in my early 20s, so it sounded like I've never been to Arizona. And he put me on police beat, and I had a man. I'm 5'2", and I had my boss was about my size, a very irascible Polish guy, and he would constantly be screaming at me, "Where's that story? Where's that story?" I had to. This is pre-internet, so I had 2 police scanners in my car. I had a radio strapped to me at all times. And I, by the way, have the worst sense of direction. Ask anybody. And so he would be asking me to go to all these sites where a murder took place, or, suicide, drowning. And here I am, fresh out of school with no experience at all, trying to find my way. Half the time I would get lost because it was a new city. I didn't know where I was going, no maps. And it was a very harrowing experience. And I think I really learned how to be a crafty, because I knew that if I didn't get the story, and I was more scared of my boss than I was of the police who were, I was working with. So that gives you an idea.
So the lesson to mine own self be true. I assume like that was not the best fit for you, which I agree. I think that's a really good career lesson for all of us. But it brings up another question, another point. How do you make sure as marketers, how do we make sure we aren't too focused on ourselves, but we put the customer first with our marketing? I wonder if you have any specific examples of figuring that out. Because, for example, when Flint McLaughlin, our CEO, and I were interviewed on SiriusXM a few years ago, I love this quote from him. He said, "The marketer every day goes to work with a blind spot. That blind spot is rooted in human nature, and particularly in our own self-interest. No matter how hard we try, we are often blinded by our own self-interest." And I think that's a big challenge we have as marketers. So how do you stay true to yourself, Renee, but at the same time, put the customer first with your marketing? You have any specific examples of that?
When you say customer, do you mean the client's consumer, or do you mean the client?
I mean the client's consumer, because I think as sometimes, I know you're on the agency side, we have to help the brand not have those blind spots themselves. There's been so many times, like when I worked at an agency and you'd go into that room, and I'll give you a quick example while you're thinking, right? I love this example because, the founders of a company, especially when you're working like with startup companies, they put their blood, sweat, and tears and treasure and everything into that company. So they cannot see it as the company possibly can. And so I remember we do these value proposition workshops, and we're working with this really cool company, had this cool patent. And at some point in the middle of the value proposition workshop, because we ask questions like, if I'm your ideal customer, why should I buy for you? We challenge them to try to understand why a customer would like it. And at some point, the CTO gets up and he says, "Hold on, I want everyone to understand this one thing. Every other technology out there is a bicycle. We are a Lamborghini." And so I stopped and I said, "Well, that might be true, but take a look at sales figures. There's a whole lot more people that buy bicycles than Lamborghinis, right? Sometimes we just don't need Lamborghinis. So just having this great technology, that's not going to be the answer to sell your product." And again, that's that blind spot we can have where we put our own self-interest first. So do you have any examples that you can think of how yes, we want to be true to ourselves. We want to help make sure our clients are true to themselves too. But at the end of the day, we want to put our customers first with our marketing.
So I'll give you a couple of quick ones. For a healthcare company during COVID, they were providing vaccines to the underserved. And that group is very fearful. They're very apprehensive. We wanted to give them free vaccines. And we said, we really need to understand and listen to them. One thing we learned, and we had to report to them, is they don't want to come in because they think you're going to ask for their driver's license. And there were some undocumented people. So we said we have to be really careful and make sure that we put into any correspondence We're not asking for driver's license. We're just asking for your name. And the other thing we realized is that that consumer was not trusting of a medical institution. When we said, as much as you want to share with them how great it is to get vaccinated and the importance, we want to do a peer-to-peer campaign. They need to hear it from other people in the community. And so we created a whole peer-to-peer campaign of talking to different people who did get vaccinated, why they got vaccinated. Some of this was in Spanish, some of it was in English, some of it was in Farsi, different languages. And we, whenever possible, put the client's name at the bottom of the ad in very small letters. It was all about getting engagement versus selling. You're not going to push people to get those vaccines. And it was really hard for the client because they just wanted to go out and say, tell them we need to get vaccinated. They need to get vaccinated and we're going to give it to them. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. They really want to feel safe and they want to know that other people in their community felt safe.
That's great because we can have the best value proposition in the world, but if we don't understand the customer's anxiety, that could be the inhibitor that stops them, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of hospitals, you mentioned, so you worked at a major metropolitan hospital in Los Angeles County in your mid-20s, and you said the lessons you learned was say yes, then figure out how to get it done. Tell us the story. How'd you learn that?
That's really interesting because that was my first marketing job, Torrance Memorial Medical Center. And my boss, big shout out to Mark Matson, because I had no experience as a marketer. And I really, I was leaving the Arizona Republic and I really wanted that job. And I remember he brought me out to interview and I had a list of questions for him. He said, you were so brazen. I can't believe you wanted to spend a half a day with me when I was just wanted to spend an hour with you. I said, I really wanted that job. But, I just, I learned at the seat of my pants. I just learned, and I had to create a lot of my own processes because I realized, he said, just find a way to make it happen. And so what I did, a part of the job was getting press, PR for the hospital. So I set up a mini newsroom out of my office. And I had all of the different departments reporting to me, and I'd call them on a daily basis. They were like my beat folks, and I'd call them and I'd say, hey, anything new going on? And we ended up getting so much press for that. At the time, they'd never done anything like that before. I had to do an annual report. I didn't have a clue what to do, how to find vendors, photographers, and I just sort of, and again, remember, this was pre-internet. So, you had yellow pages and white pages and a telephone and not even a fax machine at the time, maybe a fax machine, but that was it. You had to find your way and look for people. And so I've always been resourceful and tenacious and persistent. And that's kind of the way I operate my company as well. Just say yes and find a way to make it happen.
Well,
no is not an option.
Well, I love the Beats example, how you looked at the different departments as Beats. I was telling everyone listening, like newspaper, that's a great background for marketing. You learn so much. But let's talk about your company, because let's talk about the second part of that lesson, how to get it done, right? In building an agency, do you have a specific example of how you balance the creative with the execution? Because, for example, when I interviewed John Reed, the CMO of AI Identified, on How I Made It Marketing, one of his lessons was the key to turning great ideas into successful campaigns, you need a door kicker like Hannah. And Hannah was someone who made an idea happen. They had an idea to launch a bottle of Jameson into space. That's a creative, that's an idea, but then you got to get it done, right? So in building an agency, those two skills don't often reside in the same people. Some of the most creative people are not the people that can execute. So when you're building your agency, you're building your team, you have an example of how you made sure, okay, you had that creative, but you also had that discipline to get it done?
Well, one thing, Daniel, that's really important, the most brilliant creative ideas, this is something I learned. If you're pushing the client to do something because you love it and you think it's a great idea, chances are it's going to be hard to sell in the idea. So learning how to convince a client that an idea, and especially if it's a really out there idea that may not be comfortable doing, you have to gain their trust. And it's really important that first thing before you launch into to engaging or selling to a client is to really make sure that you have a great relationship and that they trust you. And you build that by doing the things that they ask you to do, by showing up on time, by getting the work done, by if you say something's going to cost X dollars and it's going to take X number of hours, you stay true to your word. And when once a client trusts you, then you want to collaborate. You want them to feel like it's their idea. So you bring it to them. Remember when we were talking about XYZ and you said, I want to do something breakthrough. We took that and pivoted from what you said. And here are 3 ideas, and we'll leave it to your discretion. I'll always say, too, I preface by saying, one of these may make you uncomfortable, and that's actually a good thing because it means that it's a little scary. But sometimes the most uncomfortable ideas are the ones that will really resonate with your customer or your client. And we'll test these to make sure that they're safe and that we get a positive result.
Well, let's talk about some of the uncomfortable out there ideas. How do you make sure they get executed? So I could see you personally are someone who, like, as you mentioned, you've got that tenacity, you can push it. But like, then if you're hiring an agency, you have to multiply yourself, replicate yourself, right? You're building out this team. So is it like, okay, we're going to build half the people who are creatives and half for account people, and the account people make sure it'll get done. The creative people have the same wild idea. Or in a more boutique agency, is it like, no, I need to find people who have both disciplines. They need to be creative and they need to be executors too. So how do you set up your team? How do you build that team? Is it okay, I'm going to divide and conquer. You here's the brilliant ideas, here's the execution, or no, we're boutique, we're a small team. I need to find these well-rounded people that can do everything.
So we're very, we wear a lot of hats. Bill Williams, who's a strategist, is also exceedingly creative. So he helps push through ideas. And then in terms of executing, our team, our creatives execute themselves. When you're that small of an agency, you wear a lot of hats. We also have, as I mentioned, 15 people who are outside, and I work with some of the best creative people. One of our creatives is Greg Collins, who's won all kinds of awards, and he's great. And he was actually full time with us back in 2008. And if we need a really big idea, I'll pull him in. Michael Caden, who has worked at Deutsch, is somebody who's one of the most insightful creatives. And he'll come back and I'll say, Michael, we need a universal truth about something. We were working with the Salvation Army on their adult rehabilitation program, which is a drug and alcohol program. And we needed a really big idea. And Michael brought in a universal truth. And Greg Collins came in and came up with a brilliant idea based on that universal truth. So the creatives execute themselves. We don't, that's how it works. And it's a team approach. We do a ton of digging before we go back to the client with ideas, really getting the biggest insight and the biggest, I don't want to say idea, but
truth. I like the word when you said truth before.
Universal truth.
Find that universal truth. Yeah.
And before we go into even sharing concepts, we want to make sure the client tracks everything. So first thing would be consumer research, coming back to them with the findings. We take them through a process. So they're prepared. So when we show creative, they're nodding yes, because they've been through the process versus, hey, here's an ad. What do you think? It's right. Always, yeah.
And what are your lessons?
Yeah.
Well, yes. So, I mean, what we wanted to get to is that execution part, because I feel like that's where a lot of creatives can fall down, is the ability to execute or not execute. And how do you balance that? And so I like, as a small team, you said, well, look, we're going to have to wear a lot of hats and we're going to have to figure this out. But you also mentioned one of your lessons is to provide an exceptional experience. And it sounds like that's what you're trying to do. You said you first learned this when you were 8 years old selling lemonade.
Oh, so, there's a comedian, Sebastian Maniscalco. I can't remember. I'm butchering his name, but
I love Sebastian Maniscalco. Yeah, absolutely.
Maniscalco, yeah. his dad hits him on the head at 8 years old. And he goes, "You're 8. Go start a business." It's like, that sort of sounds like my family, What are you doing? You're 8 years old. Start a lemonade. Start thinking about what you can do to start saving money for college, And so one of the things I did was a lemonade stand, and everybody else in the neighborhood did it. It wasn't that creative. And ultimately, I ended up doing plays, and my dad built this playroom, and so I'd bring people down and charge them to do plays, and that's kind of when I first started being creative. But because the lemonade stand, what I had to do to be competitive was this is where I learned value added. So you charge the same thing everybody else charges, but value add, you get a homemade cookie or a popcorn ball or 2 glasses for the price of one. It's all this. This was the seat of my pants. My dad was an entrepreneur, and I grew up with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs. But it was kind of like, oh, okay. And even with the plays that I did in my basement, my little brother, who's 10 years younger, he'd be the star, because he'd like fall down, and everybody thought it was part of the show, and he'd be crying, and they thought it was really funny. But and then they'd get a popcorn ball when they left. So it's things like thinking beyond just it's an experience. Everything's an experience, and everything extra value. What are you getting for this? What's the value you're giving? And we always say this to clients: it's not what you make; it's what you make possible. So don't think in terms of, if you're a credit union, you're not making loans. What you're making possible is you're making it possible for your 16-year-old kid to drive a car, or your customer or your member is 16-year-old to drive a car. That's what you're making possible. You're making possible an opportunity for your client or your member or your customer to buy a home. So because a lot of times people in the financial services, they think of what they do versus what they make possible.
Well, let's talk about what we make possible digitally, because I love the lemonade stand example. But one advantage you have in a lemonade stand is that interactivity, and you can learn from the customer. So, do you have any examples of digitally understanding the customer and creating a great experience? So, for example, I wrote a case study about how Pizza Hut drove what projected $7.8 million annualized uplift in revenue just from one A/B test, because they figured out just the CTA wasn't clear, right? And that just experience was off because the CTA wasn't clear. If it was a lemon stand in person or that in-person Pizza Shack, they'd figure that out before they lost that much money, right? But online, it's not always clear. So do you have any examples? I don't know if maybe a digital lemonade stand, or do you have any examples online of how you discovered what the customer wanted so you can create that exceptional experience?
So are you talking about like a digital creative campaign, or
Sure. Anything online, because like I said, the challenge with digital, that it's great creating those in-person human experiences, but we can interact. Either we've got sales folks there, if it's a small company, we're there ourselves. We're human beings. We could read other human beings. We talk to them. We ask things. We learn from them. But now we put up this digital screen. We've got this challenge. So yes, we've got these analytics or whatnot. We can actually talk to customers. And so sometimes we've got this experience that really underwhelms. It's not an exceptional experience because we don't understand the customer. So do you have any thoughts of like how you've understood the customer to create a great digital experience?
So I'll give you an example. One of the things, as I mentioned, Salvation Army, we were taxed with raising money for this division that was overshadowed by the fact that it was Salvation Army, and nobody had heard of ARC, and it was kind of vague. But what we learned from the customer was what resonated with actually what they weren't the customer, the donor. What resonated was we're giving people Salvation Army is giving people a second chance. And we had a whole campaign online and in person, but the online campaign was this giant digital red board where people could actually sign, share an experience of what it was like getting a second chance. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people. They could actually share their experience and then either donate or not. But it was an opportunity for them to engage online and talk about what it meant to have a second chance in life. Because it's all about the consumer, not just about the client. And it really resonated. Some of those stories they shared with us were so poignant and so touching. And it was the board was open to anybody who wanted to share a story. We monitored it because we didn't want anybody to, get say anything that wasn't appropriate. So we asked them to share with us, and then we post. But 99% of the people were respectful and did a really nice job and posted really meaningful and wonderful stories. And that's a way to touch people digitally.
Oh, that's great. Yes. I mean, it essentially is taking something that would be a human interaction and then amplifying it with the digital. Well, those are some lessons from some of the things Renee made that we talked about in the first half of the episode. In the second half of the episode, we're going to talk about some lessons from the people Renee made it with. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. Join our CEO, Flint McLaughlin, for Get Productive with AI on Wednesday, November 20th at noon Eastern Time. There is no cost. Learn more and register at meclabsai.com/getproductive. That's MECLABS AI.com/getproductive so you can get productive with AI. All right, Renee, let's take a look at some of the lessons you learned from people you collaborate with. You mentioned this person previously. We were talking Bill Williams, Director of Client Services at the Miller Group. You said you learned from Bill, be modest. That's not something we often see in this industry. So how'd you learn that from Bill?
He is the quintessential, he's been with the agency for over 18 years. And anybody who knows him knows he's incredibly respectful. We've had some new business meetings where we get off and we're just going, phew, and he's so respectful. He really listens. He puts the client first, and he'll always say, "I hear you," and he'll always bring his point of view if he feels like what the client's saying may not be truth, or not necessarily truth, but not efficient or effective. And he listens carefully, and he really cares a lot. And he's got a lot of. I'm from the Midwest. He's from the Midwest. A lot of our teams from the Midwest. What they call good Midwestern values, and I think that's important. Because there are a lot of companies that don't work like that, and he's taught me, just listen and just show up, and it's we're there to get results. We're there to help our clients and do the best job we can, and he does. He's good with it's tricky. A good account person is. Some account people have just the client in mind, and they don't listen to the agency. Some account people have the agency, just the focus of the agency, and don't listen as much to the client. He has a good balance. He really does balance it out, and that's important.
Well, do you have a specific example of how to balance that out? So, because I could see, definitely that's a struggle we all face. I mean, I remember sometimes, for example, we sold, we had Marketing Sherpa Summits, and we sold sponsorships, and we had a salesperson selling sponsorships who was a little overly aggressive. And so he, I'd been there longer. He wrote to one of the big, marketing company who approves you sponsor, and it's like, I will fight for you. I will fight this content team, and, we'll get you whatever you need. Because of course, on the content side, we're making sure it's balanced. We're serving the audience. We want to serve the sponsors too. But of course, I've been doing this many years. I knew them personally, and they reached out to me, and they're like, what do they need to fight for? We work well together. So it's like, bringing in that attitude of, like you said, it's like, okay, either fighting for one or the other versus coming up with that balance. I don't know. Do you have any specific stories you can think of like a time when you and Bill had to figure out that balance and how you navigated that?
I think one of the things, we had a very strong personality at the Museum of Latin American Art, the founder, and super outspoken. He was originally a physician. He put a lot of money into the museum. Dr. Gumbiner has since passed away, but it was basically his way or no way. And Bill, I watched how Bill ingratiated himself with the doctor. And that's tough because this doctor could, easily call bullshit, excuse my language. And Bill stood up to him, but he was also very respectful of him. He listened, but he stood up. And I think that's really, the doctor really appreciated that. And we ended up doing some wonderful work with that client because the doctor felt respected, but he also felt protected. Same thing with there was a credit union called F&A Credit Union, and Bill. I saw how Bill worked with the CEO, who said, what is it about us? We need to find out what is it about us that's different, and why why are our competitors doing better, or why are what is it about us that makes us shine? And what we learned was that the folks who were at F&A Credit Union really felt like the credit union had their back. And this is what we learned in research. So how Bill explained it to the CEO and the marketing director was to take the research and share and do a report, but to bring it back to the bottom line is people feel like you've got their back. And this is why it's good for the credit union. And here's how we're going to approach this. And they listened because they respected him and because he listened to them as well. And it's a collaborative give and take effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we talk about that collaborative give and take effort, sometimes the client pushes back too much. Sometimes they have that blind spot and we need to kind of stand up for the customer, so to speak. So I love this next lesson you gave because, as I mentioned at the top, I've had this so many times in my career. I mentioned designers, but yeah, it really comes from everywhere. You don't have to like it. You aren't the target. I love that. You said you learned this when working with Stan Waldman, the former president of the Wolf Range Company. So can you tell us how you learned this?
Yeah, okay. So this was one of the very first accounts I ever landed, and I was still in my 20s. I knew very little about the business. And this was at the time, Wolf, the commercial side of Wolf business, this was way back when, was like a 25 or $30 million company, very, very well respected commercial cookware. And they knew commercial cookware inside out, but they didn't really know much about consumer cookware. And they were moving into that space and hired us. And I brought in an award-winning team to come up with a campaign, which was all based in brilliant research done by a guy by the name of Spike Bragg, who's no longer here, but really insightful, brilliant work. And the campaign was all about what differentiated Wolf from everybody else is unlike the other high-end commercial style ranges, Wolf truly was the finest commercial range found in the best hotels and restaurants in the world. And the campaign worked toward that, and it was just phenomenal. And so when I showed it to Stan, and this was back in the day before I was learned how to sell good work in, he said, I don't like it. I don't like it. And my heart was pounding, and I said, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. That was the first thing, I'm going to get fired. But I stood up because I knew it was good work. And I said, you and I don't have to like it. We're not the customer. I said, but your consumer has to like it. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, if it doesn't work, I will take full responsibility. Because you bet you will. I'm gonna let you go. And that was his distributors. Some of them liked the campaign. Some of them didn't like the campaign. His retailers never had seen work come out of Wolf. And so the campaign came out, and at the time we were doing bounce back cards. You would never do that today. Bounce back cards in magazines. And we tested a regional ad in one of the California magazines, and we had about 800 or 1,000 cards came in. The offer was let us tell you about Wolf Ranges, and you'll get a little Wolfgang Puck cook booklet. The client had all these cook booklets. He didn't know what to do with them. I said, well, let's give them away. And so after that first ad came out and the response, And his marketing director said, what am I supposed to do with all these leads? I said, work them. And then after that, we agreed that he was going to keep us on, and we stayed for, I think, 8 or 9 years until the company was sold. So it was a scary time, but you have to, like you said, stay true and just convict. If an agency doesn't have conviction, you know, you have nothing to stand on. You have to have the conviction to believe that it's going to work. That's
Well,
what we're hired for.
Yeah, let me ask you about, you mentioned research generically. So how did you learn what the customer would want? So for example, I interviewed Jennifer Kim, the executive strategy director and partner at 21st Century Brand, on How I Made It Marketing. One of her lessons was, don't think of your customers as a target to acquire. Think of them that you want to invite them to participate in something with you. And she talked about launching BMW's first electric vehicle back in 2010 when, and so the challenge back then is it had a lot of limitations. If they were just trying to sell it as any other car, it'd be very limited. But they realized, they kind of, did a lot of focus groups with the audience, and they realized that the audience wanted to be part of something with BMW, wanted to feel like explorers with BMW, wanted to feel like they were doing something new. So they didn't have to sell on the features and functions. They more sold it as, hey, come along with us and let's figure out this new thing called electric vehicles. So for your discovery, sharing the Wolfgang Puck cookbooklets, and like what you mentioned research generically, how did you learn what the customer wanted? How are you so confident of that to put your account on the line, so to speak?
The budget was very modest. We couldn't afford to do groups. So Spike Bragg and I literally went to retailers and sat with them and watched them sell product. We tried selling on ourselves. We talked to consumers who were at stores and eavesdropped on their conversation, listened to what they had to say. We asked them questions. Hey, what do you like about this equipment? Some people volunteered who bought equipment to talk to us. And one thing that we learned was a lot of celebrities were buying this equipment. We were trying to think, why, if they don't cook, what does it mean to them? It's subsequently became a status symbol, but why Wolf? Like they could get a Viking, they could get any other product. Why did they pick Wolf? And what we learned was a lot of these high profile celebrities had people cooking for them. And those people worked in the restaurant industry and they knew Wolf. So they said, geez, if it's the same Wolf that I worked on at such and such restaurant or hotel, I want it in the house. And they spec'd it. It wasn't the celebrity. So in one case, I love this story. We went to a retailer and he shared this really prophetic story. He said, a couple came in a beat up old car, and they were in a really high end area of California, somewhere in the Bay Area. And none of the salespeople in his shop wanted to work with them because the car was all beaten up, and they seemed like kind of average folks, tire kickers. And so I guess one of the gals who worked said, I'll go call on them. And within a half an hour, she sold one of the most expensive ranges. And the reality was they were saving their money. They didn't care about their car. So the woman was going to become a cook, a chef, and she wanted that equipment in her home. And it's such a great story because you got to pay attention to everybody and you got to hear everyone's story. And that was a great thing, a jumping off point for us because it became, this equipment is the finest equipment for people who love cooking. And if you love cooking and you want to cook like Wolfgang Puck, this is the equipment to buy.
All right, well, let me ask you about that while I've got you, because you are my target in a sense. And we were talking about this when we got on. So obviously my target is the marketers and entrepreneurs we serve with what we publish. But another target I have is the sources we publish. We wouldn't have Marketing Sherpa if we didn't have sources. And you mentioned something to me I think you were quoted in a Marketing Sherpa article 12 years ago. You said, well, what was that like? Tell me about my target. What was that experience?
Yeah, that was great. It was maybe 12, maybe 15 years ago. I don't know if you all contacted me or I contacted you, but you were looking for a resource to talk about affluent marketing, marketing to the affluent. And I gave you a quote, and it appeared in the Marketing Sherpa newsletter. And afterwards, I got at least a half a dozen marketers contacting me to talk about affluence marketing. So it was really interesting. And ironically, I think it was something to do with Wolf as well. So, yeah.
There you go. You're getting a lot of mileage out of the Wolf stories. I'm glad to hear it. All right, one more lesson here. You mentioned the more you value yourself, the more likely you are to take calculated risks. And you learned this from Amanda Cooper, a transformational coach. How did you learn this from Amanda?
So I do it's a closed group. It's a networking group, and it's women who are business owners who want to increase our revenue and become more successful. And her philosophy is take we are the most important people. So be true to ourselves, take stock of what we have and what we're good at, and really focus on that. And each week we meet on a Saturday for about 45 minutes. We share our stories, and she helps us be our best selves. And and just hearing from other women business owners. I'm also in WeBank, Women Business Economic Council. It's a women certified program for women business owners, and I hear a lot from women business owners. We tend to be a little bit more not always as confident as our male counterparts. So having other women who can share their stories as well helps us uplift our own helps us uplift our spirits as well. When you as the owner of a company, it can be very lonely. But when you hear from other women who are in the same situation with much bigger companies feeling the same way, there's that sense of realizing, wow, I'm not alone. There are other people who are experiencing the same thing.
Hopefully everyone listening is getting that experience too, hearing you say this now. But can you give us a specific example of how that lesson to value yourself more affected a specific decision in your business? So for example, I interviewed Marco Mueller, the CMO of Aviva, on how I made it in marketing. And one of his lessons was you can make a big career and still stay human. And he told the story of when he led the marketing for Russia and the CIS countries for SAP, the CMO of all of SAP visited him in Moscow. And unfortunately, we're going to go into a bunch of meetings. Unfortunately, those few days, there were some public events going on, horrible traffic. So the car wouldn't work. They couldn't get a helicopter because, just the Russian elite could get it or whatever. And so the CMO turned to him, and in the moment he said, "What do we do, Marco?" And he said, "Well, we could take the subway, but, there's no air conditioning. It's crowded, security concerns." And the CMO's like, "Let's go." And so they went and they found all their meetings in Moscow, taking the subway. And he said he felt like, oh man, I'm getting fired for this or whatever. I'm in so much trouble. But the CMO had this great attitude of like, hey, that was fun. You found a solution. It was fun. We did it. And it kind of, there was that story click in him of like, hey, this guy is the CMO of all of SAP. He could be this human. I can be this human with everything too. And so for you, Renee, do you have any specific examples of how that lesson about valuing yourself more as a business owner, how did that affect a specific business decision you made?
So sometimes a account just doesn't work out. And, as a business owner, you have to look at your revenue, but you also have to look at your folks. And if they're not happy working on something, you have to stand up for them as well, because they're part of the team. And I think valuing yourself is really looking and saying, is this a good fit? Are we doing a good job? And sometimes you have to just turn away and say, this isn't working out. And occasionally that happens. But I think it's really important, because my philosophy is, when letting go of something that isn't working and being true to yourself and valuing yourself, something better always comes through. It may not come through the next day or the week later, but the universe abhors a vacuum. So when you're truthful and you tell your truth, more wonderful things happen. And I think that's what life's all about, is just telling the truth.
I like that. Nature abhors a vacuum. Something good's going to come when you do the right thing. Well, you've told us so many stories from your career, from selling lemonade with BOGO promotions to going around in the middle of the night in Arizona without a GPS to selling Wolf Ranges to people with beat up cars. If you had to really sum it up, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer, in your opinion, Renee?
So I'd say adaptability, the buzzword of pivoting when something isn't working, jumping to find another solution. Critical thinking is so important. Don't just take research for the sake of research, but go deeper. What is the insight? We always ask why. Good marketer, why are you doing that? Why are we, going in this direction? So really critical thinking and really understanding that consumer innovation. How can you do something better? I spend a ton of time watching. It's called Love the Work, and it's put out through Cannes Film Festival. And I probably do an hour a day just looking at some of the best work, because being the best you can be. And I listen to some of the top marketers in the country through Marketing Sherpa's other channels, hearing their stories, because it's motivating. So listen to those top-notch folks, the cream of the crop, the 10% of the marketers who are doing a phenomenal job. What's a story you can take away? How can you be better? And being better by listening to what they have to say. Leadership's important. Making sure your team really is on board, that it's collaborative, that they trust you, that they feel comfortable, that they feel safe. A lot of CMOs, it's incumbent upon them to make their folks feel as safe as they possibly can and respected. Employees and team members, they want to feel like you really respect them, that you listen to them, and that they matter. Making sure that they matter and that they're heard. I think that's super important. And that goes along with empathy. If someone's having a bad day, find out what the heck's going on, and try to get into their head and try to understand. One of our employees was just caught in this hurricane, Helene, the ravages in Asheville, and she was out of power and water and food for literally 2 weeks. Oof. And we kept trying to get a hold of her and say, "Don't worry, we got you. You're taken care of. Let us know if there's anything we can do." Those are the kinds of things where people want to know that you care and that they're being heard and that they're human beings and that they matter.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing all your stories with us, Renee. Now everyone gets to hear from this top marketer and hopefully learns a lot of lessons. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketing, SHERPA.com.